If you've been struggling to make a cheesecake that doesn't crack, then follow along and I'll show you how to make a cheesecake that doesn't crack and without the hassle of a water bath. The cheesecake is super easy to make, and we're going to get to that in a minute, but we're going to start off by making the crust. This crust is my favorite type of crust to use for cheesecake. I'm starting off with a half cup of walnuts that I'm going to put in the food processor and then just process them until they become ground, not into a paste. So once you see them in small little pieces, you'll stop. You don't want to end up with walnut butter. No good for a cheesecake. Then I'm going to add those ground walnuts to the rest of my ingredients, which is going to be a cup and a half of graham cracker crumbs. I didn't grind these graham crackers up myself. I bought some in a box already made. So I just got a cup and a half of those, added my walnuts, and then I'm going to add in a quarter cup of brown sugar and 5 tablespoons of melted butter. I'm just going to mix all of it together until there are no more dry pieces and it all becomes moistened. And you can see what I did with the base of the springform pan is that I made a trace of it using some parchment paper and a pen and cut it out because this will make it a whole lot easier to get it out once it's all done. If I don't use the parchment to get the cheesecake out when it's done, then I'm going to make things a whole lot more difficult for me and the cheesecake because I'll end up tearing up this whole graham cracker crust, and I don't want to have to do that. So before I put it in the oven, I've got it preheated to 375. Moving the mixture around with my hands to make it more even before I press it down and make it firmer before I put it into the oven. But before I even do that, I'm going to use a glass to press this down and make it a lot more even than what my hands would do. I'm going to pop this into the oven for about 5 minutes, and while I wait, I'm going to get started on the custard. In my stand mixer, I've got 4 8-ounce packages of regular cream cheese, and you want to make sure that it's room temperature. In fact, make sure all of the ingredients are room temperature. You want the cream cheese to be at room temperature, and the eggs to be at room temperature, and the cream to be at room temperature, because this is going to make it less lumpy and a whole lot easier to mix. So in addition to the cream cheese, I've got a half cup of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a half teaspoon of salt. And to that, I'm going to add 2/3 cup of heavy cream. And make sure that you use the low speed for the heavy cream, because if you crank it up, you're going to end up with that heavy cream everywhere. Now I'm going to add my room temperature eggs, and I'm going to do it one at a time, and I'm going to do it until they are just incorporated. This right here is one of the secrets to making a cheesecake that doesn't crack. You don't want to overmix it, because if you do, then you're adding in more air, which will then cause the cheesecake to crack. When you get done incorporating all the eggs, you want to make sure that you immediately stop. Like I already said, you don't want to overmix. Now I'm ready to add the custard to the springform pan. I'm going to do something that you don't see other people do, which is line the sides with parchment. This is going to make it a whole lot easier for me to get the cheesecake out once I release the springform pan. I don't want to mess up the sides of the cheesecake by using a torch to loosen it or by using a knife and just tearing it up. It's a whole lot easier to just get some parchment and line the sides before filling it with the custard. And before I fill it with the custard, I'm going to drop the temperature of the oven to 325. I'm dropping the temperature to 325 because I'm not using a water bath, and I want it to take just a little bit longer versus getting too dry. But that's only part of the secret. Once I've got this in the oven at 325, I'm going to put it in for about 40 minutes and then turn the temperature off and leave this in the oven for another 40 minutes. That is going to be the real secret to keeping this cheesecake from cracking. Now that it's out of the oven, I've let it sit for about 15 minutes. I'm going to remove the parchment and see how well this looks. And you can see that it made it a whole lot easier to get this thing out of that springform pan. You can see no cracks. This right here is the result that I wanted, no cracking. By putting it in the oven at 325 at a lower temperature for 40 minutes, leaving it in there for another 40 minutes. With the oven off, this allowed me to make a cheesecake that had no cracks and did not need a water bath. A lot of these cheesecake experts say you have to have a water bath in order to keep the cheesecake from cracking, but that's just not true. In fact, a water bath can make your cheesecake soggy because a lot of times the water will seep in from the aluminum foil, making the crust soggy. And nobody wants a soggy crust. So I just avoid that step altogether and do it this way, and it works every single time for me. Just like you can see, using that parchment on the bottom made it a whole lot easier to get that cheesecake from the base. Another secret to share with you that I didn't do myself is if you see air bubbles in your custard mix, you can tap it on the counter for about 30 seconds before you pour it into your springform pan, and that will get rid of the air bubbles when you bake your cheesecake, if that bothers you. At this point, you're done, and you can use any toppings you like, or you can make it plain. You're going to see a video from me where you're going to see an amazing topping that you've never seen before on a cheesecake.